The killing of a criminal under police custody shocked the country, but it is now an everyday occurrence. Custodial deaths have become a way of life in the world's greatest democracy, India. In the decade of 2001 to 2010, 14,231 deaths in police and judicial custody happened in India. This is about 4 deaths every day in police custody. Some may die these stage deaths, but others may also be poisoned or tortured over time. These deaths may only show you the extreme, but the whole police system is rife with physical violence against the accused, and it all goes unquestioned. The Constitution of India guarantees various rights to a prisoner or a person in custody. Under Article 20, 21 and 22 of the Constitution, the Supreme Court has interpreted certain rights such as right against inhuman treatment by the police, right against handcuffing, right to free legal aid, is an integral part of Article 21 of the Constitution. But when a suspect dies in custody, it is unconstitutional. Custodial deaths in India have a set-up plot. It has been shown in many Hindi movies as well. The entire situation is staged in such a way that it seems that the criminal was running away from the court of law, and as a crossfire, the encounter is done by the police in order to protect himself from the criminal. Incidents of police torture often hit the headlines and expose police to severe public criticism. Globally, India ranks 140th in the Human Rights Index. It is not a number India needs to be proud of, but change comes from the top, and that is where it will have to begin. That will happen when politicians stop using police to settle political and personal scores. Until then, welcome custodial killings into your society as a gift of your political system. Krishangi Sinha, Democracy News Live, New Delhi.
The establishment of the Indian democracy happened after hundreds of years of misrule of the British. The police was a brutal force, then used by racist white masters to suppress brown slaves. The Indian population thought that they would now have a rule of law that would be fair and just and based on the ethics and morality of ancient India. But those were dreams and utopia. The reality was that the new brown Sahib had taken over the role of the white master. Custodial killings is an extension of that master-slave mindset. The Indian Constitution was well thought out, so was the Indian Penal Code. It gave human rights and fundamental freedom to the accused. But what was learned from the British is taking time to change. If the nation of India has to develop into a moral society with strong ethics, then it must be brutal to deal with parts of the executive that are criminal and cannot be called administrators. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to our daily broadcast, It Matters. Today, we are discussing the new age Goondaraj in the form of custodial killings. Over 14,000 people killed in 10 years. It is shameful as a society. It needs a deep look. And so to have that discussion, bringing in two of our guests on the panel today. Kishale Bhattacharya, he's a senior journalist, he's a columnist, he's an author. He's written 3 books, Blood on My Hands and An Unfinished Revolution. He's currently working as a professor and associate dean of Jindal School of Journalism and Communication. Also joining me today is RRPN Sahi. Mr. Sahi is a retired IPS officer who served the government of India for almost 38 years in different capacities. He served as Commissioner of Security, Civil Aviation before his retirement in 2010. I welcome you both to the show, sir. Let me start with you, Mr. Bhattacharya. You've written a book around it. Please tell us how bad the state is.
Well, Rohit, I wrote the book, I published the book in 2015. And I suspect nothing has changed on the ground since in the last 5 years, if it hasn't changed in the last 73 years. If you ask me to describe it in one word, then I would use the word impunity. Of course, if you want me to go into details, there are several details, but I think the state of affairs of police brutality or of the state being culpable in torture and in killings, custodial killing, is almost at an unacceptable level though there is nothing called an acceptable level. So it is always unacceptable. Even the single case of custodial killing is unacceptable. But it has gone to a point where the police reforms now need to be brought in urgently, which has been pending for several years. And I'm sure my uh, other co-panelists will agree to that. We've been in the police service and they have seen it far more in the face than we have. We have only reported. Uh, I can only, invoke someone who has followed very closely till the time he was alive, a gentleman called Sri Satyavrata Pal, who was member of the National Human Rights Commission. Sorry to say that just within the 5 years of when Satyavrat Pal was in the National Human Rights Commission, did the commission actually have full hearings? When full hearings means all the 5 members sitting together in hearings, and they did go to Chhattisgarh and states like Manipur for those hearings. And just in those years, the number of, I mean, to give you a statistic, if I remember it correctly, 82,000 complaints against police torture, of which about 900 of them were murders. Okay, and these are, so when the NHRC may be a toothless body for a lot of people, and obviously they cannot, it's not a prosecuting body, but it can investigate and can provide relief, and it can recommend to the state, but it holds the state culpable. And what it does, it says that any killing in the custody or even a suicide in custody of the state is culpable. So going by the numbers that you have in 2020 and even by what we had 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the state has been culpable of homicide.
What we realize is that the challenge with this is very deep rooted. It's not one state, it is not one, small force somewhere. It is across this country. Especially, you brought up the Northeast. I was in Arunachal Pradesh last year. And one of the challenges I was seeing there was the police was completely aligned with the political groups. When political parties change, they go on one side and they're not answerable at all because it's so difficult to control them from here. And that was a big, huge challenge. But, anyways, let's open up the discussion a bit more. Mr. Sai, you've been in the police service. What was your experience through the 38 years? How tough was it?
Well, firstly, I'd like to apologize to both of you for not being ready in time, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
No problem, sir.
I believe what Mr. Bhattacharya has said is true in parts. It is no doubt that there is a problem that we face, and a lot is being done to remove the problem. Now, I don't want to go into the various laws and the remedies, the human rights commissions, and the various factors that are in place to prevent such things from happening. But it still does not happen. It still keeps recurring. And often when a person is taken into custody, he has to face interrogation. And sometimes the interrogation and the methods of interrogation gets wrong. And by that I mean is that there is a rush to produce evidence. There is a rush, there is a pressure, and in that sometimes it happens that the interrogation, the police oversteps, humiliates the prisoner, and such cases have come to light. But the measures that are in force to make sure that such people who indulge in such wrong methods of interrogation are not encouraged, that is a responsibility of the hierarchy. And as has been said, that it is not true to say that everyone is complicit in this. For example, in my own career, I have not experienced any harm that has been done to prisoners while I have been serving. A lot of my service has been outside the main policing area, but when I was in the field, there is a message that goes out. That message is that this system of interrogating with violence is not acceptable. Any doubt or confusion. But this is just one aspect. Interrogation in custody is just one aspect of the malaise. There are so many other reasons for death in custody. There can be a suicide. Now, the suicide also is a shameful thing if it happens in custody. But the infrastructure that exists to make prisons or holding areas in police stations is very inadequate. There is
It
not
is.
enough infrastructure in place to provide clean, clean places, neat places where a prisoner can be safely kept. So these are the problems. Plus, there are even amongst quarrels amongst inmates which cause injury to each other.
Right.
The health of a prisoner. These are various issues. So there is no doubt that there is a problem. Sorry,
Right,
you were
sir.
saying
So,
something.
Mr. Sai, I agree with you. And, I think what we're going to stick today is custodial killing specifically. And, I understand as, we talk about the interrogation methods, they can be sometimes really bad. Violence is used constantly uh, around police stations around this country. I don't think I've walked into a police station ever and I've not seen somebody being slapped or somebody being, pushed around. I don't think one visit to any police station in this country, I would have not encountered it. So it is a big challenge. I know what sometimes happens is the checks and balances are so far removed from the real policing at some level that it's just goes away. I go to a police station very close to where I live in a rural Indian site. I constantly see it happening, and it's become the rule of law. If you see multiple videos in the last few months as well, which have floated around the internet, wherever you see them, hitting peers, civilians standing with sticks, even protesters standing with sticks. So you know the violence that is happening. But beyond that, when you begin looking at how brutally prisoners are killed, the recent killing of the Dubey from UP, a criminal, alleged, gangster, should have been tried. In Hyderabad, four accused of a really brutal rape. The country should have seen them go to the gallows. Should have been a fast court, but they were taken to site at 4 in the morning and they were killed. One of our journalists was told by one of the senior officers, we're not killing them yet because there is too much media around here yet. And the night the media exited, that night the killing happened. So we knew it was going to come sooner or later. It happened so blatantly that police thinks it can get away. They also think they'll probably be able to get a pat on the back. And I'm sure you, when you were at the top and you gave them solid instructions, don't mess around with the law. And that is what we are talking about. The messaging has to come from the top. When the messaging comes from the top that it will not be tolerated, people down the line will automatically fall in line. They know they can't overstep. And there are ways of interrogating to be able to get information out, but you should be willing to wait because you will have to break the sleep cycle of the alleged criminal. You'll have to keep them around for hours. You'll have to spend that kind of time. And the reality is our police forces are understaffed. They're working 18 hours a day. So with all due respect to what we are talking about, we are accusing them. But the other bit is that the police forces have a very inhuman existence as well. So we'll talk about that. Mr. Bhattacharya, let me come back to you. I'll come back to you, Mr. Sai. Mr. Bhattacharya, explain to me How large was your research? Where all did you go? Explain to me how you wrote the book, and how did you come about it?
Well, Rohit, the research was actually about, it's the span was good 25 years, and it was focused mostly in the states of erstwhile states of Jammu and Kashmir, and of what we call the Northeast, though the term Northeast does not fit very comfortably with me because it kind of uses a broad brush in explaining or in kind of putting together, clubbing together the diverse number of states and people. So my book, though it did touch on the police, the role of the police, it focused mostly on the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, on which the police also piggybacks. Let me tell you, with the army, because in many of the areas, as you know, there are joint commands. So the army heads the command, but it is the army, the paramilitary force, and the police which actually carry out the operations. So in most of the operations, all the three services, all the four forces are included in that. So this was the area and the time frame of my research. The scope of my research was several multiple cases, case studies, going back to the location, um, speaking to the people. But what interested me, Rohit, is that while we knew all this was happening, the two things that made me write the book, one was that we had no idea why the perpetrators were doing it. So if we are alleging or accusing someone, why were they? We did not hear their voice for obvious reasons. I mean, they're not going to come out and say we murdered someone, and that was the challenge that I took upon. And the book basically is that's why confessions of staged encounters, and I call them staged encounters and not fake encounters because they are not fake; they are real encounters. Interestingly, the editor of my book. The publisher, whoever the editor was given, the editor was an Australian gentleman, and he found the name very curious, and he called me up to, before he read the book, to say, is it a romantic book? And I said that this is not far from romance. His name was Carl. And I said, why do you ask this? And he said that, well, the word encounter in English language means a romantic encounter. So it's very strange that how the word encounter entered the Indian lexicon in terms of violence. And it came in 1967, actually in Telangana, because let's not forget the idea of, or the tradition of false encounters, stage encounters started in Telangana, was stepped up in Bengal under Siddharth Shankar Rai, who of course brought it to Punjab much later when he became the governor. That was during the Naxalite period in Bengal. It was, made very blatant in Punjab and was perfected to a fine art in the state of Assam in what was called the dark period of the secret killings. But, and all these are covered. In fact, one of the survivors of the secret killings narrates an entire chapter in which he was blindfolded, picked up from home, and then shot from a cliff. Just miraculously, he survived. He was thrown off the cliff. He was shot at point blank range, but he survived to tell that story. Many of these people are still there around us to tell. So there is corroborated evidence, people telling us exactly how it happened, where it happened, when it happened. What is the other worrying part? Sorry, I mentioned two worrying things, but I'll add three. So the one was that the perpetrator's account. The second is that the complicity and the silence of the media, and including me, in the sense that when we would cover an encounter, it basically would come as a press release, which we would run as a ticker. Very rarely would we go to the site to investigate because we did not have the resources. I work for a private organization. I worked for NDTV for several years. And the state organization, of course, we don't hold them accountable at all. So the state broadcasting organization are there, and there is no state-run newspaper in that sense. So it is difficult. If you get a news of one self-styled commander of the National Democratic Front of Bodoland, or a Jaish-e-Mohammed, shot dead in the early hours by 14 Rajputana rifles. We take it as a given and we run it as a ticker. It's only when there is a backlash from the village or from the civil society, that is when we go, because that is what makes a story. Now that within inverted commas, and that of course created this huge conspiracy of silence, because for years we did not investigate the killings,
Right.
which was happening
No,
systematically.
no,
And the
you're
third thing,
absolutely right.
Rohit, and I will stop there, the third thing is that in a country, if you are going to reward people, the guardians of the state, with awards and medals for head counts, for killings, then there is a fundamental problem in the way democracy functions out here.
No, you make a very good point. Also, you talked about something funny there. The encounter always gets you killed. That's just the reality of life, I guess. But you're absolutely right. I was talking to a scientist of Indian origin. He said, what we subsidize for the farmers, it's a very disconnected one, but it kind of talks about how India functions in many ways. So we subsidize the fertilizer. The fertilizer kills the soil. You should reward and subsidize improving of soil quality. And so rewarding just skills is not enough. Rewarding human rights, your percentage, what you've been able to do, how you've been able to maintain law and order might have been a good way of going about. Mr. Sahi, I know that it's a difficult one. 10 officers, 100 officers, 500 officers. It's difficult to handle this. What is the way you see out? You spent 38 years in the police services. What is our step forward? What do we need to do now that in retrospect you see what has happened over your long career? What needs to change? Where does the change have to come from?
Mr. Gandhi, thank you. I feel that we can give a lot of examples of such incidents, which doesn't change the fact that there is a problem. I don't want to go into the details of the mechanism that is there to check this, because that will not solve the problem. It is, for example, today you are sitting here and doing a scrutiny and giving examples of custodial death. This information technology, which gives the right to citizens to speak openly, the media to speak openly, is a big deterrent. Now, a single case happens, either the media will be there or the public will be there. This is a big deterrent, and it is a path that is going in the right direction. It should be encouraged. There should be more coverage, there should be more. So I feel that the media's role is very important, and it does a good job in bringing to light. I would like to caution against one thing. There is an attempt on public demand to glorify certain things, to make it romantic, so to speak, whereas it is a very disturbing issue. And sometimes when this is carried away, a macho image goes to the people that you have to be. I'd like to give an example, since some examples have been given. For decades, the police were hounding Veerappan, a scandal that had occurred around his stealing sandalwood in the jungles of the borders of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. A decade-long search for him went on, and finally he was tracked and killed while he was being taken, while he was ambushed. And there is a book written on this. So you have cases, and there are many such cases, where genuine encounters have taken place. Now, because that doesn't, Veerappan's case was very sensational, it got a lot of media coverage. But other such encounters where men have lost lives, they have engaged the enemy in a fierce gun battle, the sacrifices that they make is also something that is worth remembering. While there are some people who perpetuate this kind of violence against people, there is another small thing that I want to mention. This society that we are living in is doing a lot of profiling of people. You belong to a particular caste, you belong to a particular tribe, you belong to a particular community, you follow a particular faith, and each one is identified with this. This seeps into the society, and from the society into people being brought up, and it has become a genetic curse where with education only you can reduce this problem. The police also, I'm afraid, suffers from this. It profiles, and that is when the tragedy takes place. It
Right.
says, so I'm trying to make a point that there has to be a general, holistic approach. If you keep quoting that supervision should be there, laws should be strengthened, you can go on, and you can
You know,
reach.
no, I'm with you, Mr. Sai. You made a very, very good point. The media has a role to play, but I think the population today has a role to play. One of the things that the United States did, and I'll raise it, and even Canada, a police officer cannot stop a citizen from making a video. That is unlawful. A police officer for stopping somebody from making a video can actually be charged. And that's a very, very important thing, is that if there are rules around all of this, that if you're caught, if there is a custodial death, then an immediate suspension, full inquiry, not by an internal police body, but by a body which belongs to members of the community of that area, nominated by the community, elected by the community, not the same guys who are already in bed running politics. So I think these are ways around it. The policing system, the way it functions in other cities, the city takes charge of it. There are citizens who are responsible for just looking at the police. I think the whole setup of police is a little off here. And I think that needs to change dramatically. Just day before yesterday in Rochester, when there was allegations of brutality against a black man, the police chief retired along with his command center entirely. That's the kind of moral high ground is required. When a large killing happens, when it seems as if the police chief has failed, then they need to be able to step down. And I think that's not happening. Those are all signs.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that this is exactly what I said about profiling.
Right.
When you see a black being shot, there is a lot of profiling that goes on behind these incidents. It's a social malaise. It's a social malaise which is there in an advanced country. It is here too.
And that is what the people are fighting. The society is standing up. The morality of a society which stands up for the people who are being profiled and are being are being pushed around. And I think that's where the morality of the society comes in. But I think here what we are trying to discuss here today is the power that the police has and what its responsibility is to the nation. It's an important one. It's not an easy task to make sure that the executive is going to do its job. But when you're a leadership of a country, then it's your responsibility to make sure that you deliver. Custodial killing should be a thing of the past. If you talk about the great Indian tradition, the ancient civilization, I don't think custodial killings are a part of that. So if you want to establish something like that, then you'll have to be serious around it. And there needs to be checks and balances in place. Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. Thank you, Mr. Sahi, for joining me for this show. I appreciate it. And good night and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.